Welcome to 3 scary Walmart stories that will haunt you. Smash like and subscribe to tread the thin line between reality and the surreal. Let's begin our eerie expedition. I've always prided myself on being a logical person, someone grounded in the tangible offers of the world. The laws of physics, the certainty of mathematics, these were the principles that guided my life as a software developer. Ghost stories and tales of the supernatural always struck me as amusing at best, foolish distractions at worst. So when I planned my quick trip to Walmart that evening, the last thing I expected was to have the very fabric of my reality questioned. It was just after dusk when I entered the store, the list in my hand minimal: toothpaste, soap, a pack of socks. Mundane items for a mundane task. Yet, the moment I stepped through those sliding doors, an inexplicable chill traced the length of my spine, setting the tone for what was about to unfold. The first sign that something was amiss came when I asked an employee for the aisle with the toiletries. His back was turned to me, restocking shelves with a mechanical precision that seemed oddly out of place. When he turned around, his smile stretched too wide, too eager, as if it was a mask poorly fitted to his face. His movements, as he pointed me towards aisle 7, seemed disjointed, like a puppet clumsily handled by its strings. I attributed this discomfort to fatigue, my mind playing tricks after long hours staring at a computer screen. Thanking him, I turned towards the indicated aisle, feeling his gaze bore into my back, a gaze that seemed to linger far longer than comfortable. Shaking off the unease, I told myself it was just another day in Walmart, a place not exactly known for its normalcy. As I navigated through the aisles, the normalcy I clung to began to fray at the edges. It started subtly, with items seemingly shifting places the moment I turned away. A pack of batteries I was sure had been on my left was now conspicuously on my right. A sense of disquiet settled over me, but again, I dismissed it. Stores rearrange items all the time, I reasoned, though never, as far as I knew, in the blink of an eye. It was in aisle 9, my basket half full, that I encountered the second anomaly of the night. A fellow shopper, a woman, her presence as out of place as a flower in a desert. She wandered the aisle, seemingly oblivious to the world around her, her gaze distant, fixated on a point beyond the confines of the store. In a bid to ground myself in reality, I approached her, a casual comment about the store's odd layout on my lips. Her response, however, offered no solace, her words drifting back to me, detached and breezy. "Oh, it's always a bit of a maze in here, isn't it?" There was a lightness to her tone that clashed starkly with the growing tension knotting my stomach. As she floated away, her steps light and unburdened, the stark contrast between her dismissal of the store's peculiarities and my mounting apprehension underscored my isolation in this increasingly bizarre world. The unease that had been an undercurrent in my thoughts became a roaring torrent as I continued my journey through the Walmart. My skepticism, a shield against the irrational, began to crumble when I encountered the impossible geometry of the store's layout. Despite my best efforts to reach the checkout, each turn led me back to the same place, aisle 9. The products on the shelves mocked me with their familiarity, as if they were anchors in a reality that was slowly slipping away. My heart raced, a primal response to the realization that I was trapped in a loop of impossible architecture. Logic and reason, the tools I had always relied on, seemed utterly useless here. Panic crept its tendrils around my mind, urging me to run, to escape, but there was no clear path out of this labyrinth. In a moment of desperation, I grabbed a store map, but the paper in my hand seemed to morph, the layout shifting like sand slipping through fingers, only deepening my sense of dread. It was then, amidst my growing despair, that I sought the aid of another employee. Perhaps he could offer some semblance of normalcy, or at least directions that didn't ensnare me further in this bewildering maze. Yet when I found him, my hopes were dashed against the cold, hard floor of reality. His appearance was inconsistent, his features blurring and then sharpening into something almost, but not quite, human. One moment he was a middle-aged man with a receding hairline, and the next a young guy with a buzz cut. His badge, upon every glance, seemed to flicker between names and titles, as if he belonged to all timelines and none. With trepidation, I asked for directions to the exit, but his response was a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, which shifted in hue with every blink. "The way out is the same as the way in," he said cryptically, his voice a mismatched echo that seemed both near and far. His words hung in the air, a riddle wrapped in the enigma of this twisted reality. My reflection in a nearby freezer door caught my eye as I turned away from the employee, hoping to make sense of his cryptic advice. But what stared back at me wasn't the familiar face I expected. Instead, it shifted subtly, my features morphing in ways that defied explanation. It was me, but through a lens distorted by the surreal atmosphere of this place. My eyes, usually a dull green, shimmered with an unnatural light, and my hair seemed to undulate as if alive. A surge of fear overtook me, not just of the place, but of what I was becoming within it. Whatever forces were at play here, they were altering the very essence of who I was, challenging not only my perception of the world around me, but of myself. Faced with the eroding reality around me and the terrifying reflection that no longer seemed solely my own, a spark of defiance flickered to life within the depths of my fear. If this place operated on rules outside the realm of normalcy and logic, then perhaps, in its twisted way, it followed a set of its own arcane laws, a pattern that could be deciphered. With renewed resolve, I began to observe the environment with the analytical detachment of a scientist studying a peculiar species. I noticed that certain items, when viewed from the corner of my eye, would resume their original positions, unaffected by the surreal influence that pervaded the store. With this realization, I started to experiment, walking backwards through the aisles, keeping my gaze averted from the direct line of sight. Progress was slow, a meticulous dance of sight and avoidance, but gradually, the store's chaotic grip seemed to weaken. The looping aisles began to unravel, leading me to new sections, each step forward a hard-earned victory against the madness. My heart pounded with a mixture of hope and apprehension, each turn bringing me closer to escape or deeper into despair. Finally, with the logic of this twisted realm barely grasped in my mind, I stumbled upon the exit. The automatic doors, a beacon of reality in the haze of surreal horror. I didn't allow myself to feel relief as I crossed the threshold, half expecting to be pulled back into the store's inexplicable nightmare. But the doors slid closed behind me with an air of finality. I was outside, under the pallid light of the moon, the cool night air a balm to my frayed nerves. The parking lot was exactly as I left it, untouched by the otherworldly chaos that seemed confined within the walls of the Walmart. As I made my way to my car, the events that unfolded within the store replayed in my mind, each memory a shard of glass piercing through the veil of logic and reason I had so carefully constructed around my worldview. Questions with no rational answers gnawed at me. Was it an anomaly, a crack in the fabric of reality, or had I merely stumbled upon a hidden depth of the human mind? Could it be that the store, with its mundane facade, was a gateway to understanding the limits of perception and the fragility of sanity? The drive home was a silent one, my thoughts a tangled web of theories and existential dread. The items I had gone to Walmart to purchase lay forgotten, the triviality of my initial quest overshadowed by the ordeal. I had escaped the surreal Walmart, but the experience had irreversibly altered something within me. The boundary between reality and the unexplained had blurred, leaving me in a state of perpetual questioning. The story I shared with you, as much a confession as it is a warning, leaves more questions than answers. What is real, and what lies beyond the veil of our understanding? My encounter at Walmart suggests that the world is far stranger and more complex than we can comprehend. And perhaps in the end, some doors once opened can never truly be closed.
Part 1. The Quiet Before the Storm. It was supposed to be a quick trip, nothing more than a late-night dash to Walmart for essentials. A loaf of bread, some milk, maybe a box of cereal. Simple, mundane items that, under normal circumstances, wouldn't warrant a second thought. Yet as I maneuvered my car into an eerily deserted parking lot, an inexplicable chill ran down my spine, disturbing the veil of normalcy I clung to. The store, usually buzzing with life at any hour, stood ominously quiet, its fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows on the empty spaces where cars should have been. For a moment, I considered driving away, dismissing this visit as unnecessary. But logic, fueled by a need to cling to my routine, urged me forward. Stepping through the automatic doors, the cool whoosh of air conditioning greeted me, a stark contrast to the night's humid embrace. The interior was as deserted as the parking lot suggested, save for a few scattered souls wandering the aisles like lost ghosts. Each step echoed against the polished floors, amplifying the unsettling quiet that enveloped the store. It wasn't long before I encountered him, the Walmart employee whose presence would become a recurring enigma throughout my visit. He appeared at the end of the toothpaste aisle, silently restocking a shelf with a mechanical precision that bordered on unnerving. His features were obscured under the stark lighting, casting half his face in shadow, turning his expression into something unreadable. I offered a tentative hello, seeking some semblance of normal interaction, but he remained silent, his focus never wavering from his task. Something in the way he moved, with a deliberateness that seemed out of place, sent a shiver down my spine. I hurried past, convincing myself his silence was merely a product of late-night fatigue. With the unsettling employee behind me, I moved deeper into Walmart's Labyrinth, my shopping list forgotten. Each aisle felt longer than the last, a maze designed to trap rather than guide. It was in the canned goods section that I first noticed the anomalies. A can of soup I clearly remembered placing in my basket was gone, only to reappear on a shelf I had passed moments earlier. I rationalized it away. Perhaps I had forgotten, distracted by the unsettling atmosphere. But when it happened again, this time with a box of cereal, rational explanations began to fall short. The growing sense of unease was palpable, a thick fog settling over my thoughts. I tried to focus on the task at hand, to ignore the gnawing feeling that something was profoundly wrong. But the store seemed to have other plans. The familiar layout twisted into something unrecognizable. Aisles leading nowhere, familiar products misplaced in bizarre arrangements that defied logic. It was within this confusion, amidst the silent stares of the few other shoppers, that I found myself standing in the electronics section, confronted by the glow of a row of televisions. Their screens, which should have displayed vibrant advertisements or the latest news, instead offered a reflection of the store around me, distorted and unsettling. Whispering voices floated from the speakers, a cacophony of unintelligible murmurs that seemed to call out to me, urging me to leave. Yet, as I turned to heed their advice, my escape was thwarted by the labyrinthine expanse of Walmart, now more a prison than a store. The once familiar layout had morphed into an alien landscape, leaving me adrift in a sea of consumerism turned sinister. In the distance, the child watched, a silent observer to my growing despair. Their presence, unnoticed until now, added another layer to the unfolding nightmare. Who were they? Another lost soul caught in Walmart's inexplicable transformation, or something else entirely? As I pushed my cart forward, the weight of the unanswered questions bore down on me, each step heavier than the last. The reality I knew was unraveling at the seams, leaving me to wonder if I would ever find my way out of this twisted, nocturnal odyssey. The child stood at the end of the electronics aisle, their small form barely noticeable against the backdrop of dimly lit shelves. Their eyes locked onto mine, an intensity brimming within them that seemed far beyond their years. There was no fear, no curiosity, only a piercing stare that seemed to see right through me. I attempted to approach, my instincts driven by a mix of concern and a desperate need for human connection amidst the growing absurdity. But as I drew closer, the child turned and vanished around the corner with a seamless grace, leaving no sound of footsteps behind. Each time I tried to follow, they remained perpetually out of reach, slipping away into the shadows of the store's endless aisles. Their silent appearances and disappearances added layers of confusion and isolation to the already maddening experience. The store's layout, now a confusing maze of shelves and products placed without rhyme or reason, compounded the sense of disorientation. I wandered without direction. The familiar landmarks that once guided my path through the store twisted into a jumbled, unrecognizable mess. The once straightforward task of navigating Walmart's aisles became a Sisyphean ordeal, with every turn leading me further into confusion. It was amidst this chaos, with the silent child's eerie presence lurking at the edges of my consciousness, that reality itself seemed to fray. The aisles began to shift and change before my eyes, rearranging themselves in a dizzying dance that defied logic and physics. Shelf after shelf rotated and moved, creating pathways where none had existed and closing off routes I had just traveled. Products jumped from their places, finding new homes on distant shelves, only to return to their original positions when glanced back upon. The store had become a living entity, its innards churning in a grotesque parody of retail convenience. In a desperate bid for escape, I sought the store's exit, only to find it tantalizingly out of reach. What should have been a simple, linear path to freedom was now a convoluted journey through a landscape that bore little resemblance to the Walmart I had entered. Each step forward seemed to carry me further inward, deeper into the heart of the store's madness. The PA system, once a source of mundane announcements and catchy tunes, now whispered secrets intended only for my ears. The garbled voices, indecipherable yet unmistakably human, murmured of hidden truths and urged a departure I was increasingly unsure I could achieve. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if the store itself was aware of my growing desperation and sought to capitalize on it. Engulfed by the whispers and the store's relentless transformation, I found myself at the brink of surrender, a pawn in a game whose rules were as unknowable as they were unforgiving. The child's repeated appearances seemed to mock my efforts, a reminder that I was not alone in my torment, yet utterly isolated in my experience. In this landscape, where logic had surrendered to the whims of an unseen architect, the fight to reclaim my reality became more than a quest for escape. It became a battle for sanity itself. Amidst the shifting aisles and whispered secrets, the line between the real and the unreal blurred, leaving me to ponder the nature of the store's hold over me and the means by which I might break it. With every ounce of willpower left in me, I made a final, determined effort to escape the surreal confines of Walmart. My body moved on autopilot, propelled by a mix of adrenaline and a primal urge to flee the inexplicable nightmare. Every step felt like wading through treacle, each aisle a gauntlet of psychological torment designed to erode my resolve. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drumbeat urging me onward, even as the store seemed intent on swallowing me whole. Suddenly, as if by some trick of fate or a final test of my sanity, a checkout lane shimmered into view, cutting through the chaos like a beacon. The unsettling employee I had encountered earlier stood behind the register, his expression blank, as if waiting for this very moment. His presence, once ominous, now offered a semblance of normalcy, a thread of hope that I clung to with desperate intensity. Approaching the checkout, a cacophony of emotions surged within me. Relief at the prospect of escape battled with a lingering dread that this too might be another of the store's cruel illusions. The employee's eyes met mine, and for a moment I thought I detected a flicker of understanding, or perhaps it was pity in their depths. He began scanning my items with mechanical efficiency, the mundane sound of the register beeping in stark contrast to the surreal horror that had preceded this moment. As if emboldened by the return to normalcy, I voiced the question that had haunted every step of my ordeal. "What's happening in this store?" My voice came out strained, barely above a whisper, but the employee merely shook his head, a gesture that could have meant anything. Then, as quickly as it began, it was over. I found myself standing outside, the cool night air enveloping me like a cleansing mist. The oppressive atmosphere of Walmart lay behind me, an ordinary building once again. Had it all been a figuration of my overstressed mind? A bizarre hallucination brought on by fatigue in the late hour? I glanced back at the store, half expecting it to morph into the nightmarish labyrinth once more, but it remained stubbornly normal, its lights bright and inviting. The drive home was a blur, a frenetic escape from the emotional and psychological maelstrom that Walmart had become. Arriving home, I fumbled with my keys, a sense of surreal dislocation making even this simple task a challenge. Once inside, the safety and familiarity of my home wrapped around me, a stark contrast to the night's events. But questions lingered, haunting the edges of my thoughts. What had truly happened in that store? Was it a momentary lapse into insanity, a shared delusion with others trapped in a similar hell, or something far more profound? The open-ended nature of my experience left a nagging void, a space where answers should have been but were conspicuously absent. As days passed, the intensity of the experience dulled, becoming a bizarre memory that felt more like a dream than reality. Yet, every so often, when the lights flicker or a shadow moves just out of sight, I'm transported back to that night, to a Walmart that defied reality, and I wonder if I ever truly left. The night was unusually quiet as I pulled into the Walmart parking lot, the dim glow of the overhead lights casting long shadows across the empty spaces. It was late, later than I usually ventured out for anything, let alone a mundane shopping run. But the emptiness of my fridge at home and my distaste for weekend crowds had convinced me that a late-night trip would be both quick and uneventful. How wrong I was. Stepping out of my car, I pulled my jacket tighter around me, a chill in the air that had nothing to do with the weather. The automatic doors slid open with a whoosh as I approached, ushering me into the brightly lit expanse of the store. It was quiet inside, the usual cacophony of shoppers and announcements absent, replaced by the soft hum of the air conditioning and the occasional squeak of my sneakers on the polished floor. I grabbed a cart, mentally ticking off the few items I needed: milk, bread, cereal. Simple, everyday things that shouldn't have taken more than a few minutes to gather. Yet, as I began to navigate the aisles, a creeping sense of unease settled over me. It was as if the store itself had taken on a different persona under the cloak of night, familiar yet foreign in a way that made my skin crawl. That's when I first saw him. An employee restocking shelves not far from where I stood. Normally, I wouldn't have given him a second thought, but there was something about the way he moved, the way he seemed to pause and look up at me every few moments, that caught my attention. His gaze was unsettlingly intense, his eyes boring into mine before I quickly looked away, attributing my discomfort to the late hour and my own tired mind playing tricks on me. As I continued my shopping, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched, I couldn't help but notice him again and again. No matter which aisle I turned into, there he was, always a little too close for comfort, always with that same unnerving stare, and his smile, wide and knowing, as if he was privy to some secret joke at my expense. I quickened my pace, eager to collect my items and leave. It was when I reached the bread aisle that the first truly odd thing happened. I just placed a loaf into my cart when a voice whispered my name, so soft and fleeting I thought I'd imagined it. Glancing around, I saw no one close enough to have spoken, the aisle eerily deserted. Then it came again, louder this time, undeniably real and chillingly familiar. My name, whispered over the store's PA system in what sounded unmistakably like my own voice. A shiver ran down my spine as I looked around in disbelief, my heart racing. The store remained as silent and empty as before, the only exception being the employee from earlier, who was now watching me from the end of the aisle, his smile wider than ever. My initial instinct was to dismiss it as a bizarre coincidence, or perhaps a cruel prank played by the store's staff, though the latter seemed unlikely, given the unsettling employee's silent and almost vigilant observation. But as I attempted to regain my composure, the overhead lights began to flicker erratically, casting ghostly shadows that danced along the shelves and floor. The effect was disorienting, transforming the familiar layout into a labyrinthine expanse that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. With each blink of the lights, my surroundings appeared slightly altered, as if I was seeing them through a distorted lens, a psychological disarray that I could neither explain nor escape from. My cart, once filled with the mundane essentials of my late-night errand, now seemed like a small island of reality adrift in an ocean of creeping surrealism. I clung to it, if not for the comfort of normalcy, then for the sheer need to anchor myself to something tangible. Determined to leave, I made my way to the checkout, my steps quickening with the desire to escape the growing sense of dread. The lights continued their erratic dance, casting long, twisted shadows that seemed to reach out for me as I navigated through the aisles. Every sound was amplified. A distant drop of a product, the soft hum of the air conditioning, each adding to the mounting fear that I was no longer alone in this altered version of reality. The checkout line appeared in sight, a beacon of hope that promised a return to the familiar world outside the store's confines. However, that hope quickly dissolved as I took my place in line. Time seemed to distort around me, stretching the moments into eternity. Customers ahead of me placed their items on the conveyor belt, a seemingly endless stream of products that the cashier, a different employee than the one who had been watching me but equally unsettling, scanned with painstaking slowness. Panic settled deep in my chest, a heavy weight that made it difficult to breathe. The other customers didn't seem to notice the oddity, continuing their transactions with the same mundane disinterest that one would expect in such a setting. Yet, I felt trapped, as if the checkout line was a bridge between realities that I couldn't cross, condemned to watch the normalcy of life from a distance, unable to partake in it. In this frozen tableau, I was acutely aware of every detail: the mechanical beep of the scanner, the soft rustle of bags being filled, the dim flicker of the overhead lights that seemed to mock my growing desperation with their intermittent glow. The world around me felt both achingly slow and terrifyingly alien, a nightmare from which I could find no escape. Panic turned to dread, then to sheer desperation. The immutable line at the checkout, my fellow shoppers trapped in a loop of normalcy I could no longer join, became intolerable. With a surge of resolve that bordered on panic, I abandoned my cart and turned toward the exit, the lights above flickering in what felt like a derisive farewell. Taking deep, shaky breaths, I forced one foot in front of the other, each step a battle against the invisible force that seemed to press down on me, urging me to stay, to succumb to the creeping madness that had taken hold of the store. The exit seemed impossibly far, every stride mired in a temporal fog that stretched the distance between me and salvation. I expected at any moment to be stopped, for someone to reach out and pull me back into the inexplicable nightmare. But no hand came, only the echoes of my own footsteps in the vast, empty store that once promised the mundanity of late-night shopping. Finally reaching the sliding doors, I burst out into the night, the cool air hitting my lungs like a shock. The parking lot, dimly lit and silent, was a stark contrast to the claustrophobic terror of the Walmart's interior. I didn't stop to catch my breath. I didn't dare look back until I was safely in my car, the doors locked firmly behind me. Only then, with the engine running and the familiar outside world reassuringly real, did I allow myself a moment to glance back at the store. There, standing just beyond the reach of the store's automatic doors, was the employee. His grin was visible even from the distance, a silent confirmation of the ordeal I had just escaped, or perhaps a warning of what I couldn't say. My heart thundered in my chest as I backed out of the parking space and drove away, leaving the Walmart and its eerie occupants behind. The relief of returning home was palpable, a sanctuary from the night's surreal terror. But as I entered my kitchen, intending to drown the night in a cup of tea and the comfort of my own bed, I froze. There, on the counter, was a box of cereal, an item I had no recollection of picking, one I was certain had not been in my cart amidst the confusion and fear. How had it followed me? Was it a tangible souvenir from a night of psychological delirium, or a bridge between the reality I knew and the one I had glimpsed behind the flickering lights of that Walmart? Questions flooded my mind, each more disturbing than the last. Had my experience been real, or had I somehow conjured it from the depths of my own psyche? Sleep was elusive that night, and many that followed. The boundaries of reality seemed thinner, easily blurred by the flicker of lights or the whisper of my name in an empty room. The Walmart loomed large in my thoughts, a symbol of the ordinary world that cloaked the extraordinary, the familiar facade hiding secrets untold. In the end, I was left with more questions than answers, my sense of reality irrevocably altered. The truth of that night remains elusive, a puzzle whose pieces refuse to fit together. But one thing is certain, I have not returned to that Walmart, nor do I intend to. Some mysteries are best left unsolved, some truths best left unexplored.